forward very much to this session hosted by Sheila MacNeill, who's a consultant for JISC UK. Sheila, please go ahead and introduce yourself, and let's dive right in, I would say.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the introduction. And hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you here today. I hope you can see my slides. Yeah, I'll just make this a bit big. No, I don't want to go. Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm presenting today, but this work is work that I have been doing with colleagues at JISC. So there's myself and Helen Beetham, who's also an independent consultant, and Sarah Knight, who commissioned us at JISC. So this is some work we've been doing around curriculum and learning design, probably for about the last year now. So I just want to share with you today some of the work that we've been doing, some of our findings, and some of our plans for the future as well. So yeah, so what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of an overview into JISC and the project, the Curriculum and Learning Design project. Going to look at some pre and post-pandemic, actually that was a bit of a Freudian slip there, post-pandemic learning design challenges, and then give you an overview of the current phase of work that we're just about completing just now. And as we go, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat, into the Q&A, and I hope that you'll be able to follow my my accent, because I'm from Scotland and sometimes that's quite a broad accent, but hopefully you'll be able to follow what I'm saying. So first of all, who are JISC? Well, you might have heard of JISC, but JISC are a post-16 sector, not-for-profit organisation for digital transformation, supporting colleges and universities across the United Kingdom. And JISC have and continue to play a pivotal role in the adoption of technology by UK universities and colleges, as well as the wider education and research community. And they support all of the tertiary education sector to improve learning and teaching, the student experience, institutional efficiency, as well as enabling more powerful research. So it's got quite a broad remit. In terms of what JISC covers, this graphic just shows you, kind of highlights some of the areas that JISC is involved in and I suppose is best known for. So it provides the Janet network, which is the super fast broadband network that colleges and universities use. And you can see there it's used by 18 million people across the UK. JISC also provides trusted expert advice and practical assistance in a number of areas that are outlined there as well. And they also help the sector in terms of saving time and money. They organise and support procurement and licenses for the sector, which saves, as you can see there, it's saved over £192 million for the sector. So that's a really important role that JISC plays as well. And these are some of the areas where they provide critical service. And the area that we're involved in, that I'm most involved in, is around the student experience, around the learning and teaching support and developing approaches within that. So that's just a quick overview of JISC and who they are and what they do. So on to the main focus of this presentation, which is about approaches to curriculum and learning design and what we're calling Beyond Blended now. So almost a year ago now, Sarah commissioned Helen and myself to undertake a review of curriculum and learning design approaches, really to see what, if anything, had happened during the pandemic experience, if that actually had impacted on people's approaches to learning and curriculum design, what lessons were being taken forward. And there's at the top of the chat, you will see the link that's in this file as well, but you can link to that report. So in terms of the work, we undertook a literature review. We really reviewed, I suppose, relevant research and publications from about 2020 that were really relevant to the pandemic experience. And then we conducted a survey of UK HE. This was a self-selecting survey, but we were really quite pleased with the response that we got. We had 155 responses in total from 75 higher education institutions across the United Kingdom, and they represented every type of university that we have as well. So we were really pleased with that response. We got over 2,000 free text comments as well as within that survey. I also did about 25 in-depth interviews with people who we knew were actively involved in this area as well. So we got quite a rich data set from that. So although it doesn't cover every university in the UK, I think the data that we got really did provide a really strong representation of what was happening at that point in time. And I suppose I should qualify that the data really relates to what was happening and what was in the top of people's minds about a year ago. So things, as we know, have changed quite a lot from there, but there are some things that certainly are still very, very relevant. So in terms of the findings from the report, again, not particularly surprising in some instances, but though there were a few surprising things that came out of there. But in terms of motivations and drivers for curriculum and learning design, they really were related to learning and teaching strategies at an institutional level. What we found was that many institutions were actually now going on about to undertake, or were just starting quite a major period of curriculum review. Some of that was in light of the pandemic. For others, it was because they had stopped a curriculum review because of the pandemic situation. One of the surprising things that came through in their report was, in the findings, was actually the amount of open educational resources that around learning design that were available, that have been made available by the sector. And I think that represents the people that are generally involved in learning and curriculum design support, really do support open educational practices and do model their own professional behaviour, if you like, for their colleagues. So they release a lot of OER materials. And I think that's why there's been a spread of quite a lot of models and frameworks across the sector in the UK, because so much of material is openly available. So there's a lot of sharing and people can contextualise that. So that was really very positive to see. In terms of developing approaches to curriculum and learning design, very much that was seen as needing to happen at a university organisational strategic level as well. Some people could make some changes within their department, but again, that would be a bit piecemeal. If they wanted significant changes, you really need to have that strategic buy-in. Staff workload and time allocation and access to development was a key concern for people. I think particularly, again, from the pandemic experience, but also in terms of changing modes of delivery, that people are going to be expecting our staff to teach in different ways, and people were worried about, you know, where they were going to get the support and the time to do that and the recognition to do that. So there's a couple of recommendations there that we made as well. One of the things that was coming through in more of the quantitative data as well was around about students' desire for more flexibility. But there was that conundrum, and I suppose with engagement, because as students were coming back on campus, there was, I don't know if it's the same in your institutions as well, there was a definite feeling that students weren't as engaged as they had been or possibly could be. And part of that was because they, they could access, for example, their lectures online. So why would they turn up at a lecture anyway? But what we also did recommend was, with the changes in modes of participation, with more people talking and implementing hybrid solutions, whether that was more by refitting classrooms to have hybrid technology or high flex technology in them, then we really felt that there was a need to explore what these new modes were and what they actually meant in practice to staff and students, and to share that across the sector. Now, one of the things that we did that I wanted to share with you as well is when we started the project, we were looking around for definitions of curriculum and learning design. And although Jessica's worked in this area for quite a long time, well over a decade, maybe close to 2 decades, there wasn't really a definition or definitions that we felt were appropriate. So we came up with this definition. So in terms of curriculum design, we're really thinking of reviews and planning and development at a kind of a formal, either departmental or institutional level, which might map to, for example, graduate outcomes, benchmarking, professional standards, competency frameworks, and there would be some kind of official documentation. Learning design is actually more about how the learning will be supported and developed within each course or unit of study. So that's where you would define your activities, what tools and technologies you're going to use, the content, the sessions, the groups, the modes of participation, look at assessment and feedback, you know, where there's going to be interaction, and also plan how you were maybe going to develop any new content that had to be developed. But I think it's quite important to note, particularly in the UK, that these terms are quite often used interchangeably. So you will talk about curriculum design and learning design, and sometimes they'll mean the same thing. So they are quite interchangeable. So when we're talking about curriculum and learning design in this context, we're talking about all the processes involved in planning and designing a course of study and how students will learn. So as we've moved from that first phase into the next phase, we've been, I suppose, reviewing and thinking about what has changed pre-pandemic and post-pandemic issues. So pre-pandemic, there was a lot of focus on learning design. We were looking at activity design. We had models and frameworks in place, looking at, you know, some people were looking at taxonomies of learning outcomes. We were looking at typologies of digital tools, for example. There was increased support for digital media production, and all of that was very much centered within institutional virtual learning environments. Post-pandemic, although these issues are still there seems to be more of a focus on kind of that whole curriculum design aspect of things. So thinking about designing, what it means to design for different modes of participation, whether that's in person or online, whether that's hybrid or high flex, you know, flexible learning, because that has implications for the campus, for example. I mean, how you start using your space. If you're recording lectures, do you need to have 500-seat lecture theatres? What do these new modes of participation actually mean for how we use our physical campus spaces? People thinking about assessment redesign. Assessment is always a big topic for everyone in education, and obviously now with the, you know, all the noise and around ChatGPT and large language models, then there's a renewed focus on assessment and how you design for assessment and authentic assessments, what that means. So obviously that's something we need to look at as well. And also going back to thinking about different modes of participation, we also maybe need to start thinking about our timetables. And generally in the UK, we're kind of ruled by the hour block. And maybe that needs to change if we're offering more flexible opportunities for students. Then that needs to change. And also we need to look at our workload models for staff as well, because these different modes of teaching, particularly hybrid teaching, quite often needs team teaching. So it's very difficult to be in a room and manage people that are physically with you in person, and also give the same equity of experience to those who are joining online and vice versa. So looking at those issues as well. We do, from phase one, we did come up with a general process model for the types of learning design support that is given to people. So pre-pandemic, there were a number of models in use, and generally these were maybe 1 or 2 day sessions. That has significantly shortened through the pandemic, and it's now more likely to be, you know, an hour and a half, maybe a half-day session, and people will go through these. You maybe start with some of the university principles. You'll start with you know, quality, that considerations from your professional body, learning outcomes. Then you might be applying general principles that you might have within the university, looking at your learning and teaching strategy, then going through to your, you know, how you develop those resources, your course handbook, timetabling, very specific things that are noted in the diagram. I won't read it out to you, but also that diagram, we've got the arrows going from left to right. Equally, they could go from right to left. So you could start with your course handbook and then make the relationships back across those units as well. So we see how that we're working with the sector in that, but that seems to be how people are using whatever model they are and integrating the sort of key parts of information and data that people have to hand. So in terms of phase two, which we're kind of calling beyond blended as we're coming to the end of this phase, we are continuing to do our research review because there's lots of literature coming out just now. We have developed some high-level design principles, which I'll share with you. We have been mapping these principles into whole curriculum issues for curriculum teams. So looking at it from the point of more learning design in terms of how you're actually going to teach and design your learning activities, and from a strategic point of view, so some of the broader questions that might impact the sort of broader curriculum issues as well. And we're developing some resources and processes, resources that we'll be sharing with the community later in the year. And we're also looking at ways that we can start sharing some practice examples that are mapped to these principles as well. So these will be coming out hopefully in the next couple of months. We see the fact that just now everything is blended. You know, whatever you're doing, you're going to have some form of blended. So that's why we're now thinking we are beyond blended, because our learners can access, well, they always were able to do this, but I think it's more accepted now that they can access a range of spaces and places of learning and collaborative environments. They have their own tools. We don't need to produce, and institutions don't need to provide everything for them. They can connect their learning across different times and places and modes. I think something that we've realized more through the pandemic, and we're starting to understand more, is that when you have digital artifacts and these digital media resources, for example, the recorded lecture, they can compress and extend learning time. So it's kind of, we need to explore that a bit more. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail in the next slide. And we really need to think about what combinations of our personal time and shared time and space support learning for different students in their different contexts. So, you know, I alluded to this earlier. So how responsive can you be and also allow time for reflection? You know, what are the new norms and conventions about informal and formal learning opportunities and how we develop academic and professional skills? Where are we in terms of pace and presence? If you're in a room with someone, pace is you judge it differently than when you're online. If you're doing both, then you have to think about it. There's kind of a cognitive shift there that needs to happen for learners and for teachers. And crucially, you know, what choice should students have? You know, students want flexibility, but pragmatically, how much choice can we actually give students, given the finite resource of labour within staff that we have? So these are some of the issues that we think are increasingly important just now. So I won't go into this in too much detail because I am aware of the time and I see there are quite a few questions popping in and I want to give you some time, I want to have some time to answer these questions. So if we think about the curriculum, we've started to look at it as, as time and a place and a mode of learning, then I think we're all comfortable with, synchronous and asynchronous session types, and we know now that they make different demands on people, but also where people are. So the difference between an in-person and an online experience, what does that mean, and how we access different materials in different ways and different sessions all have an impact on timetabling, on the spaces and places where we learn, and on the materials and how people interact with them. And all of these things are kind of connected through things like a course handbook, through some kind of maybe some principles, and through learning outcomes. So there's a sort of a complex interrelationship that I think we're unpacking a bit more in light of the pandemic experience. So these are just a couple of diagrams that we've developed to kind of think a bit more about space and where students might actually be. So although you're maybe the first one on the left there is in a live lecture. So if you're in a live lecture as a student, you're in that physical place, but you also are maybe in multiple other places, and these places may be university supported places, because you might have quite a highly interactive lecture where they're maybe using some kind of polling tool. So you're in that space. You might be looking at your course area within the virtual learning environment. You might also be chatting to your friends. You might be looking at the web in terms of resources. There are multiple things that you might be doing. I think we all knew that was happening, but I think we need to remember that as well. When, particularly from that transition when we were coming back onto campus, but also if you're joining if you're somewhere else and you're looking at that, there are multiple places that you are where you are. So these are just kind of ways of trying to unpack and illustrate and kind of have a conversation about where people actually are. So you're present somewhere, but you have a presence in many other spaces, or you can have a presence in many other spaces as well. So in terms of, again, what I was talking about, our interaction with digital artifacts and how that can compress time. So again, these graphics are just on the one on the left is looking at an interaction with a recorded lecture. So for example, you might have some pre-lecture activity. You might watch the lecture, then a week later you're going to do something. You might go back to the lecture and watch it speed it up, and then go into the VLE and then go back to the lecture. So you can use it in different ways. I'm just conscious of time here as well. So the graphic on the right is representing an asynchronous collaborative activity. So you'd be going on to a VLE and onto a synchronous site, maybe a collaborative site, something like a mural board, and doing various things. So we're trying to unpack place and presence in a bit more of a more meaningful way for people as well. So just to kind of wrap up this session, here are our emerging design principles. So we have 5 of them, and they are: learners and educators are always physically somewhere. So whether you're online or in person, you are physically somewhere. I'm physically here, that we're all virtually in another place together. But learners and educators can always be virtually somewhere else. So again, I'm physically here, but I'm virtually with you. And most learning now has in place and online elements, so in-world elements. And learners and educators expect choice in the modes of learning. So there has to be some choice whether you want to do something in person or you want to do something online. But finally, and really importantly, learners and educators need support to engage effectively across a range of diverse modes of participation. So these are the principles that are draft principles just now that we're starting to share with the community and get some feedback on. So that's really where we are. So we're reviewing the principles and we're trying some of our resources with our community just now. And this session is part of that as well. We're starting to share our findings at conferences and various events. And as I said, we're developing the resources for publication later this year. I'm not quite sure when that will be. But if you want any more information, I know this has been a whirlwind tour about what we've done. Here's our email addresses. So that's Sarah, who's in charge of this work at JISC, and there's myself, Sheila, and Helen, who I've worked with. And again, that's that link to the report that you can download. So I just want to say thank you for that, and I'll stop sharing now and take some questions. I'll just have a quick look at this. Okay. Okay, Anders, are there any data on burnout and dropout rates? People are starting to look at that. That's not something that we look specifically at in our survey. But yes, that is something that I think people are very aware of. I can't think of anything offhand. JISC, I don't think, has done anything in that area. But yes, certainly that was something that came through in some of the free text comments that we got in our survey as well. People were very worried about burnout for both staff and students, and kind of that related to the concerns about workload modelling as well. Elias, has flipping the class worked in HE? Yes, to an extent. I think, again, that's quite context specific, but lots of people are using flipped approaches. And I think there's been a renewed interest in it across the UK in light of, obviously, in the pandemic, because people had to move very quickly to remote emergency teaching. So people quite quickly realised that, you know, they couldn't just talk to their students for an hour. They couldn't do that lecture thing. So I think that it is starting to gain more traction within the sector. The pictures, yes, they are. I've put them in Flickr. I've put those for under a Creative Commons license in Flickr. So if you give me a second, I'll put them into the chat. If I don't get a chance to do that and you have to drop out, if you look for me, Sheila MacNeill, on Flickr, you can find them. The presentation is in the shared files area in the room here, so you can download and access that as you want. Oh, hi, Tiara. Hi. Support is important. Yes. What teachers need, I think the big thing that teachers need is time. They need dedicated time, and they need time built into their workload models to explore curriculum design, to think about what they're doing, work in teams, and just to engage, and not just be constantly doing the day-to-day. So I think the biggest thing that we can give anyone, the biggest gift we can give a teacher, is time, dedicated time to engage in staff development. But also then they have to have those staff development opportunities to engage with. So we need to ensure that we have staff in place. We need to ensure that we have the appropriate support in place, and that is modelling the teaching that we would expect our teachers to be giving to their students. So if we are doing staff development, we should be doing that in hybrid ways, if that's how we are expected to teach within our institutions.